I had a thanks for you. I guess I should say it's for you.
Yeah.
For all the work on the survey and taking all the feedback and edits. I know language is super nitpicky, and wording questions is hard, and so I feel like that is not fun to have to deal with those edits. So I appreciate you doing that and taking the feedback. I left a comment, which I don't know if you've seen it, like after retrying it in the single question mode, it was awful with like the dots, like it just doesn't work well either. So
Exactly.
yeah, I will go with whatever you want to go with on that one at this point. Like I think the language piece being hashed out was probably more important um, than the format. So I think whatever we think on the format will be fine.
Yeah, I think, yeah, for me it was the same. Like looking at it without using it, for me it also felt, this might work. But then I started using it and experimenting with it, and I lost track of where the radio button was selected and unselected. It was really difficult to look at the columns as well. So that's why I also added those vertical lines, the borders. But even so, it's difficult. There's like a lot of options. Um, I don't know. I think that either the select box, the one that was before where you had the arrows to click up and down, or the drag and drop.
Yeah, I don't. The arrows one to me was a little. The arrows ends up in that sort of ambiguous, I think, place too, where like you move something up and it pushes stuff down, but then like you've got to go refine the one that maybe pushed down because you want to move it. Like it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't have like clear numbering to it. Like I think you realize your stack ranking, but not.
Mm,
I don't know. And
right.
the drag and drop, I guess the only like the benefit of the drag and drop, what I didn't like about it, I guess originally was that like you don't see the numbers next to them until like you hover it.
Yeah,
Um,
I can change that.
if you could always see
If
the
it's
numbers and then sort of drag and drop, then that might make it easier to know what was going on. And the drag and drop would sort of be like uh, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
fine with
I
whatever.
can try. I can try having them always visible. It should be feasible if it's just CSS, because we can, like, using that Qualtrics tool, the tool we use for
Yeah,
the surveys, we can tweak the CSS as well. So I'll try doing that.
cool.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, yeah, thanks for taking on some of the milestone work for me, and being also more involved in the merge requests. That has been helpful. Um, I mean, like, you see that I still comment on the merge requests, but I'm like, I feel more supported and less pressured to make a decision. Yeah, and just I know that some things will be seen by someone, so that has been helpful, both from a time perspective, um, but perhaps more importantly from mind's perspective, mind's um, space economy.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I could do some of it. It is reviewing multiple people's MRs is actually super frustrating because it was like you check out their branch in your GDK and then you just need to like destroy that so you can check out someone else's branch. And like
Hmm.
Phil's has database migrations in it, and I'm just like, I don't like any of this. Like this is the worst review
Yeah,
system that we possibly could have come up with.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, it's been interesting. It's definitely like, I mean, I think it's clear to me that we don't do enough planning, and reviews I think suck more for us because of that. Because like some of these questions sometimes I feel like should have been answered ahead of time. So I think it's good to like experience that pain from both sides, because now, if engineers were in there looking at things first, we'd have some of our questions that we sort of come up with on the fly that like would have been answered ahead of time, and we would have already at least had thought out like what that was or if that was an acceptable piece. And I think
Yeah.
instead what we sort of see is that like uh, we're like engineer and designing on the fly, and in some ways that's good, but it's almost insurmountable with the number of engineers that this group has.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the number of designers.
yeah. Yes. Yes, it's a
um,
very lopsided ratio right now with, I don't know, I think we've got 9 engineers or something insane. It's just not it's too many people working on things to be able to know. So,
yeah. And the fact that we're not doing that investigative work from the technical side earlier, you've noticed, like I think in a couple of MRs, those questions are now leading or could lead to rework, unnecessary lost
mhm.
effort. Um, and yeah, that compounds over time, of course. But I think it's good, not only from my side that you're doing this, but as you're now sharing it, it seems like it's also has been a good experience for you to be on that end as well and understand how things happen.
Yeah, it's fun. So
um,
speaking of,
yeah, out of
let's talk about this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly ask you if you're using your local GDK or Gitbot.
I use my local GDK because it's set up and is generally there, and so like I'm fairly comfortable in moving around in it. So I
Okay.
haven't been using Gitpub, and like I have a MacBook that can like run it. Like for whatever reason, I made a good decision when I started and got like the MacBook with 32 gigs of RAM and like the i9 Pro. So like
Oh,
it can run the
geez.
GDK and like doesn't have
32
issues doing it.
gigs.
Yeah. So like I just let it go and it's fine. Like I think my GDK has been
Oh,
on for like a
wow.
week and a half at this point, like and just up, and I'm sure it's up right now actually. Yeah,
You're
it's on right
kidding.
now. And like it doesn't phase the laptop. So like I don't mind. I
That's
don't mind doing
incredible.
it.
Oh, okay. So never mind my question. Yeah, you have double the RAM that I have.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, the GDK, it was always a bit slow. So, but not like freezing the computer, but using the Gitpod for me is much faster. And yeah, everything is much faster. The database migrations, reconfiguring, updating, everything. So I only use the Gitpod integration now, and it's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
If I was still an editor, I would probably use it. When I was an editor, I only used the web IDE like exclusively. And so now that I'm not an editor, I stopped using the web IDE and I'm back to using VS Code exclusively. And so I feel like I got a dog food the stuff we worked on.
Yeah. All right.
um, so this is the allow add comment to review MR.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm mostly curious and sort of, I think like we probably all agree that like commenting on non-code is good. I think the question is like, is this the experience that we want to do that? Like, is this the first way we want to do that versus like something more aligned with what we're working on, or something in the flow of a review is sort of where my concerns are. And I guess this would like parlay into the request a re-review that we could go talk about too if we need to, but I don't know. I'm sort of curious, like more thoughts on this, like just generally what you're thinking here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up. So, yeah, I think we agree that, and as you've also experienced recently when you're reviewing those merge requests, like sometimes there are comments that you want to make that don't relate to code. It's either the behavior or I don't know, something like it could be even like asking, hey, can you link to the issue that this MR relates to, or can you add screenshots to, I don't know. So things that just are not in the changes, or even commit messages, I don't know, crazy things. Um, and right now, the experience is just if I want to use the reviews feature, I have a comment here. And now I want to add a non-code comment here to the review. And I can't. I can only comment now. So my personal experience is that I have to use different methods for when I'm reviewing things. So I need to submit a review and then start a thread for as many different issues that I found in a merge request or things that I want to comment on. And so this merge request would alleviate that pain for non-code comments, but also it would open way for people to use this box to encapsulate and finish their reviews with another comment, like saying, I've reviewed, left some comments, but approving anyway. Right. So, and then I could use this or something like that if I'm a power user, and I could add this to the review and just click one button at the same time. But I do understand. So you mentioned two things. So one of them is, okay, so if we add this ability now, like why are we adding this instead of focusing on maybe making this experience better of when you're submitting a review, allowing you to add a comment and have a better experience in that moment instead of having to go back to the overview tab and then to this comment box and then you add the comment that you want. And I think they're not like exclusive. I mean, we could do this first, but we would still need to solve this, right? We would still need to add the ability for people to add non-code comments to their reviews. So this feels like if we solve this, we would be solving one problem while also making way for people to add comments to wrap their reviews at the same time. And it could buy us some time into looking more into the submit review button, uh, which ties into the other thing that you mentioned, like the handoff and perhaps the approve as well. So as we've seen in, I don't think there's a screenshot here, but maybe
Yeah, it's in the issue where
here.
like you could approve with changes or whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's not in this one, it's in a different one. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, but I mean, extending this interface or this action of submitting to add a comment or adding in checkboxes or options for you to approve or I don't know, request a re-review or re-request a review from someone, we could then bake that into this functionality, but that will take more time. And one major, yeah, so that would take more time basically because we would have to
Yeah.
research how this would be done. We have to design it properly. Yeah, so I'll stop there. I have another follow-up comment that I want to make, but I'll stop there for you to react.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all makes sense. I think my concern is that like, I mean, even when you just did it, right? Like if you go back to your draft and you were on like the diff side and you had to then click to discussions and scroll back to the bottom to like find that. To me, this feels like a thing that you'll never find. And if you did find it and like you added that to your review and then you wanted to go back to like your changes and like sort of go back to making like more code comments, like
Mm-hmm.
that experience feels sort of just like really broken to me, like, and not one that I think like if we thought
Mm-hmm.
about it that we would want permanently. I think
Hmm.
like if in an ideal world, what you'd rather do is like if you go to the changes tab to start your review, because that's the only place you can start a review. Like somehow maybe down on the bottom where we say like pending comment, submit review, we would just add another button that's like add a comment, right? And we would just show a text box and then we would just insert that into the page later, right? We'd go back and save that
Mm.
note and put it back into the page. Right.
Mm.
To me, like I feel like you as a user, when you're reviewing, that's the experience you want. You want the review experience. And like
Hmm.
working in that other one feels, to me, it just doesn't feel like the experience we'd ever want to support. Right. Like I think I just don't, I don't know. To me, that one feels very challenging to like one, describe how you even do that to a user. Like, oh, while you're in the middle of your review, you can click these 4 tabs and go over here and leave a comment and then go back and like do all of that. Versus like
Yeah.
in the flow, if you were reviewing and there was a button down at the bottom that said like leave a general comment or leave comment and it wasn't tied to a line of code, then like that would be
Mhm.
sort of maybe more natural. Or, we think about potentially like how to leave a general comment, which is what that wants to solve. And I would say we haven't thought about how would we want that flow to work.
Mhm.
But to me, it's not what the MR is doing. Um, so if the
Yeah.
MR is going to do
Okay.
anything, I'd rather it be on submit review and like let's add it there where this button is where someone is already in that review flow and then they can leave a comment there.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I understand. I think I now understand better what you're saying. Um, yeah. So there's a disconnect. Like you have to jump through many different places to do your review, and the review should be at the center of everything. And adding comments, replying to other people, um, commenting on the changes, that should be front and center. And like you shouldn't have to move to the other corner of the house to do something, right? And then
yeah.
back. Um, so I understand that and I agree with it. But I think that's another problem we need to solve. Because like let's just focus on the codes at the moment. Like if no one wants to or needs to leave a general comment, they still need. I mean, unless you're here in the changes tab, but sometimes like when things change, we invalidate the comments, and you have to go back in versions if you want to find the outdated uh, threads that happened in code, like in 2 commits ago or something like that. So you still need to go to the overview tab and leave comments. I don't know. I don't think I have one here now.
Yeah. On the second
Um,
review pass, like there's a potential that you would be back in the overview tab.
yeah. So you have to come here. You have to see, okay, let's imagine that this is an outdated diff comment. And I would have to do this. And I would have to add to the review. And I would have to go through all of the comments to make sure I hadn't lost anything in the middle and I have replied to everything. So this disconnect and this very poor navigation of comments and adding new comments is already there. So I think that's something we need to solve separately, although it's a very interesting problem to solve and something I completely agree with. Uh, so this is just to say that with that problem already existing, the only thing we're just saying is like, should we support these kinds of new comments to be added to review? Because if I reply to Paul here, it's not a diff comment, but I can add to my review a reply, but a new one I can't.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question would be at that point, like, do you want to continue building on that debt? Like if you agree that that's not like an ideal experience, do you want to keep like making that worse? Like it's harder the more we do in an area, like if we don't think it's necessarily the right way to do it, like the harder it will be to always get out of that at some point.
So what do you think is the debt here? Is it allowing people to add general non-code comments to the review, or having to navigate to the overview tab, going to the bottom and adding them?
I think it's having to navigate to the overview tab, which is already a thing that we have as debt, right? Where you can go and comment on an existing thread, but that's because we sort of, and like let's take that like back one, right? The reason we invalidate in the diff view is because we're now showing you against the latest version, and that's why it's not there. But we save those discussions on the discussions tab, which like is maybe not also the right UI. Like we've talked about like versioning MRs like as an entire block and like sort of
Mhm.
discussions and all of it being one thing. I don't know that we'd ever do that, but like I guess my would you say that like the ability to or the a user having to go the second time they're reviewing. So like they've already done a review pass
Mhm.
once. The second time they're going and doing a review, I mean, do you think the right experience is the one we have today where you have to bounce back and forth between the changes in overview tab?
No, it's awful. But I don't think
Yeah.
that's the problem here, right?
Well,
Um,
but so if that is already not good and we add another feature to that, that's one more feature that we have to like undo in order to address that bigger problem.
why would we have to undo it?
Well, if we think that going between changes and overview is not correct, and we want to build a better way to like stay in the review lane and have one sort of path that you navigate.
Hmm.
I mean, that means this bouncing back and forth between tabs would sort of go away at some point. But like if users are now like using this path, like we've got to deal with that as part of that. You've got to like take into account all of the workflow like problems that you've built when you like go to build the new one, right? Does that make sense? Like I to me it feels like we would do it. I think we'd all agree that like it's not ideal and like yeah, it sort of works, but we don't really like the experience. Like it feels like a weird compromise to make, I guess, is like that you would say like no, it's not the right experience. We actually don't like that you have to go back and forth between the two, but like we added this feature to support you going back and forth between the two. And like yes, one already exists, but one already existing doesn't mean it's right and that we should like continue with that pattern. It right like we should maybe think like is that the pattern we want to continue with?
Okay. Okay. So let's go back a little bit and let's imagine that today the only comments that you can add to review, you always need to add them in the changes tab. So replying to comments here in the overview tab or adding them here, it's not supported at all.
Right.
So reviews always happen here. Um, I think that supporting non-diff comments in a review, however that is done, it's something that we should support. And
Yeah.
that the way that you add them and the way that you navigate to them, it's something that we could improve for sure. But I don't see that as exclusive. I don't foresee us cornering ourselves and not being able to get out of a certain approach because we did it. Because the intention is there. Like what we're saying is the intention to add a non-code comment to a review valid? Yes. So let's support that because that intention will live on regardless of the form that we create for people to get there and to navigate there. Like, for example, let's imagine
Yeah, I
that
mean,
to be a
I
bit more.
agree with that. I just worry that it's a step in the wrong direction. Um, I don't like, to me, this feels like a step in the wrong direction, and that's not necessarily like a good step then at that point, right? Like, yeah, the intent, like we sort of step in a way we thought would like do this, but it's, to me it feels like we're just building on a pattern that we don't think is the right pattern. Um, and like you'll build user habit and other things like for that pattern, whereas if we think commenting on if we think a non-code comment as part of the review is like useful, then like we should figure out how to do non-code comments as part of the review from the place where like the reviews predominantly take place. And like otherwise, like what will like and I would say inevitably, based on the way we've all seen GitLab work, what would happen is um, we would just build a new method. Like it, let's say we decide that like we just want to add a button to the bottom of this bar that says like comment, and we
Hmm.
do that, and it pops up a comment box, and we do that. Like inevitably that will exist, and it will coexist with that other one that we don't like because we won't take it away unless we're like very explicit and thoughtful and saying like we don't want that one to be the thing anymore because this is the workflow we want. And like we need to be that thoughtful and explicit, and I would say historically GitLab is not, and you end up with like sort of all of these workflows.
Right. I would say that if that were like, if we didn't do this, and this would still be the experience starting a thread or closing, so you wouldn't be able to add the review. And let's imagine we then do what you were suggesting. I mean, it doesn't need to be exactly what you suggested, but let's
Yeah.
imagine that for a second. So we would add a comment here and it would be in the review and it's not attached to a diff. Um, we would still need to think how this path of adding a comment through this area, how does it relate to this, right? And there could still be some confusion as like, why can't I do it here? Why do I have to do it here since it will be published here, right? Um,
Well, I mean, but that's like the, yeah, it will be published there until one day if we decide that like the fact that there's an overview and a changes tab and like those comments exist in sort of both places depending on a random group of settings is like not correct either, and we go and fix like that larger problem, right? Like we go and fix
mhm,
the problem where um like that's probably not a good experience, right? Like I think
yeah.
to me like there's a lot of like layered experiences here, and like ultimately if you go all the way to the top, I'd say the fact that like the overview and the changes tab can show different content depending on like which version you're looking at is at any given point in time is like probably not good, and we'd probably agree that
Mhm.
like ultimately that's like the real problem.
Okay.
um but the more we like let that continue to be a pattern that we like support through adding in other things, like the
Mhm.
harder it will be to fix that bigger problem.
Okay. Okay. So my question is, so we agree, both agree that it's the navigation of comments and having to go back and forth is broken. How how much of a priority is it? Like, is it something that we will prioritize and work on soon? Because that to me is what, that's the only thing here. Like if you tell me we're going to start working on it like next milestone or 2 milestones from now, I would say okay, so there's no use of us working here because we'll probably solve it in a much more elegant way, and in a more planned way. But if we're not going to do that soon, we're basically saying, hey, we're not going to do this, so you're going to still live with this inconsistency and having to jump back and forth, and having to add your comments here until we work on that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. My answer would sort of be like, do we think we have talked about like the thing that we want to go do? There's like two things. We want to like deal with handoff and we want to deal with tracking, right? Like tracking is the big one of like how do we communicate what needs to be done on the MR to get it resolved. Do you like do we think that piece of it is involved in that in a way that like and in order to communicate the status of the MR, we need to rethink how we like deal with versions and deal with like comments and all of these things. And like, would that lead us down a path that like we would do that? And I don't know that I think there's the one path where we would be fairly um you keep the scope small and you deal more on like a file level of communicating sort of things and tracking across versions, or you we could take like the much bigger view. The much bigger view is harder. Uh, I don't know that we've thought about it, or I haven't necessarily thought about it enough to know like what all we would have to touch and how much of a rewrite it would be and sort of all of those questions. But like, I mean, I think we'd have to investigate that.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we're very well. I'll remove the very. We're far away from um, having the ideal experience that solves the tracking problem and this publishing problem and adding to a review properly. Because those things, as you said, like we could go down a path and solve both things at the same time because they're very much related, right? I could envision, like, imagine if you had a sidebar. Um, well, forget we have sidebars, but imagine you could see a list of things you have to respond to or drafts you have created, and you can easily navigate between that while looking at the code, for example. So you could always have a list of more or less your to-dos inside of the merge request, and you could jump back and forth through them without having to know if they're in the overview tab, if they're in the changes tab, if they're in version 1, in version 2, in version 3, it doesn't matter. And that experience or something else that solves it, I think we're far away from that because it will be to solve this properly. I imagine that it would probably be a departure from the current experience, significant departure. So we'll probably have to test it as well. We'll have small iterations, refactorings, blah, 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 blah. So that's, yeah, I'm more concerned about like delaying this and um, even if we prioritize it, it will take some time
Yeah,
for us to get there.
that's fair. Okay, let's do it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I, I really appreciate that you're thinking more about this and like how, like, could we be cornering ourselves by doing this? And the only thing I can say is that with everything that we know today, I would say no. Um, so that's my best guess.
Okay, yeah, then I think that's fair. I think like the framing of when we would go and do it the way we want to do it is probably a fair argument to like let this slide for now, and then see if we can address it differently when we get the chance to. So yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want to
Cool.
update, or do you want me to go and update the MR? I'll do it
If
actually,
if
because since I'm the dissenter, I will go and do it.
yeah,
Yeah,
I wouldn't use that term, but I was gonna ask you to do it. Yeah.
yeah. I will do it. I'll take care of it later today. Um,
Okay.
cool. I
Awesome.
appreciate the chat about it, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. I'm gonna jump since I'm late for my next one, but I will yeah, we will chat and enjoy your kid day tomorrow. Hopefully it's fun. I don't know. Sometimes they can be.
Yeah,
So
cool. Yeah, good luck with the rest of your day.
yeah. All right. See ya.
See ya. Bye.